Hi, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to Undercurrent Stories. This is the show where we hear about people's interests and uncover some fascinating stories at the same time. I hope you enjoy today's show. A month ago, I was given the opportunity to interview an author. Her new book, Daughter of a Promise, which came out in April, is a modern retelling of the legend of Bathsheba and David. I set about doing some research, and the more I read about her background, the more interested I became in having a conversation with her. Not only is she an award-winning and best-selling author, an essayist, but more recently she took the decision to leave her life in the city and purchase a farm in Wisconsin. And along with her husband, they have dedicated themselves to regenerative farming. If that's not enough, I discovered that she has some great insights into creativity, and many of her interviews give some great advice for people wishing to start their own writer's journey. So it gives me great pleasure to be joined by Jeanne Blasberg. Hello and welcome to the show, Jeanne.
Thank you, Bob. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So you're speaking from Wisconsin, from a farm, is that right?
Well, I don't want to ruin your impression of me, but I am currently spending the 4th of July week with my family on the East Coast. So you are catching me in a town that actually is part of the setting of Daughter of a Promise. It's the town that inspired the place where Eden is in that book, which is also the topic of my first novel. So this is a long family tradition of spending the 4th of July together, and I've just arrived here.
Is that something that happens quite a lot in the US? Families will sort of be together on the 4th of July.
I think it's a privilege to all come together. I think our family has always had a strong, sacred feeling about summertime. And it's a big, depending on when the actual holiday falls, it's an opportunity for my kids to have maybe a long weekend off from work. And so therefore, with the 4th being on a Thursday, it's kind of a 4-day holiday, and with them in their 20s and early 30s starting their careers, it's really a good time for us to all be together, and they have an opportunity to leave their offices. But yeah, it's typically a day where people have cookouts and go to a parade or go to the beach, and communities come together. If not families, then definitely we get together for fireworks and things like that.
Yeah, well, we've got a 4th of July tomorrow in the UK, but that's our general election. So we're going to be out and about as well.
Yeah.
Before we talk about your life as a writer, could you just please tell us a bit about yourself and your life's journey and how you got into writing and then farming, please, Jeanne?
Yeah. Well, I'm 58. I lived all over the United States. I think I just mentioned I have 3 adult children. When I graduated from college, I actually ended up in finance and working on Wall Street, and that turned into another job that had a couple more jobs that had finance as its core. And I ended up in Boston in 1994 with a young child. My husband was starting a new job, and I got hired by a professor at Harvard Business School to write cases for his courses. And those case studies are great because they're very formulaic in a way. You set up a protagonist, a business situation, a conflict, and then those are the basis for the students to learn their lessons each day and debate what the right answer is for this company or this business problem. And so I was home with then 2 small children eventually, and writing these cases and thinking this is a great lifestyle. I mean, we didn't at that point even have the internet for me to do research. I was still going to the library and doing some travel for research. But I had loved writing, doing creative writing and those types of classes all through school. And I kind of felt like I was returning to this ability to express a situation or express myself or a person's situation through writing. And so after that job kind of worked its course, and the professor I worked for retired, I continued with this. And being in downtown Boston, I was able to access all these great university adult educations, evening extension schools, and I really started working on the craft. And I was doing a lot of essay writing and shorter pieces, but I'm a big reader. And so there was that desire to emulate this art form that I really loved. And I wondered if I could ever write a novel. My family transferred to Switzerland for 3 years, and I was able to be less of a carpooling mom and more of a mom whose kids used public transportation, which was amazing. And I could enjoy bigger expanses of time and brain space. And I left those 3 years with what I thought was the great American novel. And I would come back to the United States and set the world on fire. But again, I needed to kind of go back to school, and found this great organization in Boston called Grub Street. And so one thing led to another, and more mentorship and more revisions and more revisions. And Eden finally came out in 2017 after over a decade of kind of coming up with the story and working on it. But at the same time, my kids were growing up and becoming independent. And my husband and I are both athletes and have a lot of interest in health and fitness and longevity. And I've always grown veggies in our garden. And for as long as I can with the season here in New England, that those veggies I grew would be really a mainstay or staple of our family's diet. And I really prided myself on that, but also felt so privileged to be knowing exactly what went in my mouth. And so, that's always been part of me as well. Fast forward now to 2020 and COVID, and I had 2 novels out, and I was working on this current one, Daughter of a Promise. It was kind of the work routine of writing kept me sane during the sequestration and kind of lockdown we experienced here, and I'm sure you experienced. But the idea of where are we going to get fresh food every day became more and more challenging. And farmers were suffering and restaurants were suffering, and the fragility of our food system really became apparent. My daughter took off in a Sprinter van and traveled the country and lived in national parks for a year. And I joined her for the last 3 weeks of that journey. And driving from Washington State eastward towards Colorado in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, we just encountered one wildfire after another. And so the idea about food fragility, this climate change disaster that we all need to kind of try to deal with in one way or another. My husband and I just looked at each other one day and said, we're healthy, we're fairly young, we have some resources. We could have even more resources if we sold this Boston house and a lot of the things that don't really mean anything to us anymore. His parents had passed on during COVID. His office had shut. Our kids were now not sequestering with us and were gone. And I kind of had this existential crisis. I love to create. I think creation and nurturing, I can see those as part of my core being. And we decided to restructure our financial situation and look for farmland. My idea at first was just like, let's buy land and not till it and repair the topsoil. My husband is a little more commercial, and he was worried about, well, we should grow something and we should have a market, and who's going to work the land. And, we put this desire to be a part of the food system out in the universe. And really, we were reintroduced to an old family friend who wanted to become a farmer and was in Wisconsin, and encouraged us to come look in his state and his region at the beautiful farms and and that beautiful geography. It's called the Driftless region, and it extends through northern Illinois, northern Iowa, and eastern Minnesota, southwest Wisconsin. It's a part of the United States that wasn't glaciated in the last ice age, and it's so hilly and unusually rocky with canyons and rivers, and we just fell in love with the place. So anyway, we also found a restaurant chain that wanted to be our primary customer. And it was 3 years ago on the 4th of July that we reconnected with this family friend. And now we're in our second year of bringing this 420-acre farm into a veggie producing, animal grazing, and we're growing some field crops. We're growing corn this year, but hope to move towards a wheat or a small grain that would be more for human consumption in the next 3 or 5 years.
That's an amazing story. Whilst I can appreciate that you were at a stage in life where everything was right to do what you did, it still must have taken quite a bit of a sort of big decision to make, I would have thought.
Everything was right for us. I feel like we are at this intersection of health, good health, thank God, some time. I mean, my husband is working crazy hours at his regular job, so he might argue that his time isn't that free, but also resources. And, you get to be your late 50s, early 60s. We've had so many friends and family members pass at an age that is shamefully young. And so we feel this responsibility to kind of do something big, not just because we're able to, but because there's so many people we know who would have wanted to live longer and do more, and we can. And so, the things that might have held us back, the fear, the needing of stability. I mean, thank God, like our kids are brilliant and talented and wonderful, and they're going to figure out their own lives. And I don't have this situation where I'm wedged in between aging parents and children who need our presence. And being in that sandwich generation, and we're not, I feel like, there's a saying, those who have, I'm going to butcher this, but, those who have much also have the responsibility to do a lot. And I guess during COVID, it was just a real eye opener. In the United States, it was such a time of social unrest and fear. And I felt like I want the rest of my life, even if I go broke doing this.
Yes.
I want to go down like trying to do something important, or, really just even giving an opportunity to the next generation of farmers. We employ over 10 people on our farm right now, and giving some young folks an opportunity to manage land in a way that's really healthful. And hopefully that will take on, like, even just doing that, I feel like we're already making a difference, and we are feeding people, and that feels really good. There's a long way to go to achieve some of these dreams, but there's something really great about waking up in the morning also with the sense of purpose. My novel writing is very solitary, and I do feel like my novels add to the greater conversation in the world, but I also really love the counter position of working with a team of people and contributing to a community that's really very local. And I think that was something that my novel writing felt was kind of isolating. And it's okay. I'm an introvert. I'm an only child. I've always spent a lot of time by myself, but there's something really magical about working with a team of people and talking about our visions and our dreams, and then working together to try to make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm keen to talk about the writing and the books, but just before we do, I'd just like to explore a bit more about the farm. Regenerative farming, that's a bit more than just being an organic farm, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the idea of regenerative is that we're putting more back into the soil than we're extracting. And so that word in of itself is kind of like an additive word, whereas industrial farming and the feeding of the masses has involved the extraction of all the nutrients from the soil with a lot of monocropping and tilling and spraying. the idea of regenerative farming is really going back to the oldest practices of how farmers used to work and indigenous people used to work in concert with nature, using animals and their grazing and their manure to create compost and fertility for the soil, and to have those ruminants graze and improve the grasses and have a root structure that's really deep so that water and carbon are sequestered and preserved, and to kind of honor the life that's under that, the life that we can't see in the soil, because that is the life that gives the nutrients to the food that we eat. Hopefully the people eating our food from Forage Kitchens, which is the restaurant chain, at like a $12 or $13 price point, getting a salad, when they bite into a piece of spinach or kale or cucumber, it doesn't just look like a cucumber, or a carrot. It actually has great vitamins and nutritional value and is acting as medicine for your body. So, approaching the topsoil with so much care and intention, we hope helps the health crisis we're suffering, the climate crisis we're suffering, and really, those two things, and just like making people feel better. It's very healing and being part of the community. So regenerative, just thinking, and it's not just the soil. We're trying to regenerate the people who work on our farm. A lot of farmers have been treated like indentured servants or slave labor and have carried a lot of debt and a lot of physical pain for our country's food system. So it's trying to work in a way where people are paid well, they get some time off, we can have enough people working so everybody's not killing themselves, and it's just a really beautiful place to be. I don't know if all those things are going to exist in tandem, but the experiment is to see if they can.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar in the UK as well. Our farmers used to get a lot of subsidies when we were in the EU, and there's still a bit of uncertainty over that. And we've got a program actually called Clarkson's Farm, which is on Prime. It's probably off in the US as well.
I am addicted to I'm addicted to Jeremy Clarkson. Yeah. I have to admit that I've learned quite a bit about certain pieces of equipment, and actually watching seasons 1. Well, it's funny because, we feel cringy that we're like those owners who came in and were like, how hard can it be? And then you're very quickly fed your humble pie. But I'm devouring season 3. Yeah.
It's brilliant, isn't it? You can probably vouch for it, but one of the things that got me about it was how he's becoming sort of almost endeared to the people that he works with there. And also the when you grow up as a kid, you look at a farm and you think, yeah, spring, summer, blah, blah, blah. It all happens. It's the same every year. But the amount, and you'll have seen this, the amount of variables that go on, the weather, the cost of stuff you're putting on the fields, the cost of seeds, able to get labor and all this sort of thing. There are so many variables. How do you find all that, putting it all together? It must be quite hard.
It's really hard. It's like waking up every day knowing you're going to have a new set of problems, whether it's disease on your romaine because there's too much rain this year, or last year we had Canadian smoke and a drought. When things go well, it feels like such a miracle, and I think you wake up expecting a challenge every day. And everybody knows there's a challenge, and we come together as a team quite often and talk about our agreements. We are a team. Somebody could drive the UTV into a tree stump and break it. We have to not blame each other. We have to communicate in ways that are assuming good intent. And, there's just a lot going on. We've got livestock, and the goats have hoof rot, and it's just like a lot going on. The sheep need to be castrated, but we think some of the sheep are already pregnant. It's just it's almost comical. But for a kid who grew up sort of wanting to be a scientist, this is a very low-tech way. I mean, obviously, it's very complicated. I have a wonderful produce manager who knows a lot about soil science and growing food. But this is a way of entering and being part of the natural world that is amazing. I mean, for as many problems as there are, there's maybe just as many joyful miracles that happen too. So that keeps you in the game. It's kind of like being a golfer and getting a birdie on the 18th hole. You want to come back and do it again.
And how have you found the transition between city life and being in the country farming?
I think I'm the perfect age. I just love the quiet. I love the peace of being able to hear the birds and kind of the rhythm of the day as it unfolds. I'm starting to get weary of engines and motorcycles and sirens and some of the crowds. So that I had a time in my life where that's all I wanted. And I feel like even though there are only about 4 people who live on our stretch of road that's a few miles long, I've become good friends with them. I feel like we're being welcomed, and it's just a really cool place to be. Luckily, like I'm here in Rhode Island. I'm not like on this island of a farm without the ability to do other things. So again, I've got the best of both worlds, but I do ache to return there. I love it.
And how has the life on the farm affected your writing?
Oh, I have a character who's ending up on a farm in my next work of fiction. And I also have just been writing about the eye-opening encounters I'm having, the wins and the losses and the lessons learned about starting a new business and a new farm. I want to document what's happening, and I'm writing a little bit about my relationship with food and how that drove me to become part of a more transparent food system. I think there's a lot that's being inspired to write about, but also there's lots of quiet. My typical writing life involves a morning writing practice, which I'm able to continue on the farm, and then anywhere, but from noon on, I will then be out on the land and kind of working with folks or checking things out. It's a nice balance of being like cerebral and at peace in the morning with a lot of quiet, and then interacting with the rest of the team in the afternoon. And, obviously it's not like set in stone. If there's something I need to do in the morning, I can do that.
Yeah.
But still, and this time of year, we have light and daylight until 9 o'clock at night. So the afternoons are just delicious, and then they roll right into the evenings, and we eat some fresh food from the fields, and we talk about the day and what needs to get done and watch the sunset. And it's just spectacular.
Could you just tell us a bit about your latest book? And I think I'm right in saying that the 2 books before it's not exactly a trilogy, but they can be interconnected. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. I didn't set off thinking I would write a trilogy. As I mentioned, Eden took quite a long time to come out. And when it came out in 2017, I thought, boy, this is finally done, and it's all I have in me, and it's the story I needed to tell. And I wrote my next novel, The 9, which is really about a mother and her son and his embarking into the world at a very prestigious boarding school, and kind of a scandal that ensues and his navigating that. Those books came out in quick succession. The first one, obviously, all my blood, sweat, and tears. The second one, born more out of personal experience and righteous indignation. And I ripped it out quickly and revised it so it was more universal and more accessible to a greater reading population. But both of those books did quite well, and they both had allusions to the Bible. Eden, obviously, a reflection on paradise and what is a utopia, and that's all I'll say. The second was kind of launched from the story of Hannah and Samuel, where Hannah is barren and prays for a son in a pregnancy, and says, if I am so lucky to become pregnant, I will turn my child over to the temple when he's weaned. And my temple was this boarding school. So she she's like thinking her son is her gift to the world. So that's a little bit about helicopter parenting, but also that relationship. But for the first time, I really now have taken a biblical story with Daughter of a Promise, the story of David and Bathsheba, put it into a contemporary setting, and followed the plot points more or less truly as they are in the original story. So it's not just symbolism and a launching pad. I've really put the story in a modern context. And the original story is King David of Israel spots and is quite attracted to a beautiful young woman who he sees bathing on her roof. He calls for her and finds out her husband is a general in his army. Nonetheless, they lay together and she becomes pregnant. And then all sorts of crazy machinations go on in David's mind to preserve his reputation and to avoid all the fallout from what he's done. And as I studied this story, two things really struck me. One is that it felt so contemporary. I was reading this story in a class at my temple during the height of the Me Too movement, when all sorts of powerful men were getting taken down and all sorts of brave women were telling their stories. And the power dynamic and the mismatch of power felt extremely relevant. We were talking in this class about consent between a man and a woman, that if this story was true, and maybe it was, but happened thousands of years ago, and here we are still with the same human struggles and inability to really communicate or sort things out when there's such desire and chemistry in a situation. I also was struck by the fact that the story was told entirely with regard to David's life and its impact on his trajectory. And there was no mention of Bathsheba's feelings, her reactions. I mean, what happens in the ensuing paragraphs, and it's quite a short story, is quite tragic. But there was no mention of maybe what the impact was on her. And so I felt inspired to take Bathsheba's character, turn her into a young Bethsabe Ruiz, and tell this story in her point of view with a very strong voice. She's actually writing this about this year in her life as a letter to her unborn child from the point of view of slightly older and wiser, with a retrospective, the ability to kind of comment and editorialize like some of her choices. But it's an exploration of this relationship and consent. And I actually give her a lot of agency. She isn't a victim. She doesn't want to be a victim. She wants to be part, a decision-making part in this, play a strong role in making the decision to do what she does. Although there's some waffling and back and forthing, as there always is when you're young and you're trying to figure out how to be an adult and how to interact and how to live a life that's both true to how you were raised and your values, but what's going on in your body and your mind in the current moment. And so I really did want to explore this gray area and not label anything as like sexual assault or abuse or a woman who is completely signing up for a relationship with an older man without there being like this gray area of back and forth. And there's this, idea that consent is either black or white. And my idea was to explore a relationship that was like really complicated and couldn't be understood or put into a category or a box. Because in the original text, in the book of Samuel, David and Bathsheba end up together. And I had to reconcile, what is it about this man and this woman that keeps them together? And they have more children. And their next children, one of them is Solomon, who will be the king of Israel. So, Bathsheba can't just get off without taking any responsibility for this relationship. And I really wanted to write something kind of complex about about a relationship, but put it in that fast-paced investment banking Wall Street milieu.
Yeah, I mentioned before we started the interview that I've been listening to the book. I'm about a third of the way through now, and it's interesting contemplating from a lady's point of view as the protagonist, and the thoughts, and obviously, you know, having been written by yourself as a lady as well, it's quite insightful. So I'd certainly recommend it for any man if they want to read it, just to have something a bit different.
Well, I was saying, Bob, that makes me so happy to hear. So I mentioned that this book is in the structure of a letter that Betsabe is writing to her unborn son, Saul. And she takes the opportunity at many junctures in the chapters to impart wisdom and wisdom to a young man. She says, you'll read this someday when you're much older, but it's kind of a letter about how women think and how to treat a woman and how to be a responsible partner. And, you know, she imparts other words of wisdom, not to drink too much, not to, you know, this and that. But in the book of Samuel, in the Old Testament, King Solomon is attributed with the mantle of wisdom. He is the wise king, whereas David was the warrior. Solomon is wise. And it is written that his wisdom was a gift from God. But my book presupposes that his wisdom was imparted by his mother, which I think is probably the way it actually happened.
Yeah. So in terms of your writing process, just before we talk about the writing process itself, I know you sort of alluded to it earlier on when you were doing it in the mornings, but one of the things I noticed is that you were quite an advocate of this 30-day habit for creativity. One of the interviews you had, you were saying that you've tried a few things out, and you were sort of recommending it for people who perhaps wanted to really sort of get their creative pursuit out and try a few things out. Could you just explain what that is for listeners? Because I think it's something very, very useful.
Sure. And I think I've talked about this 30-day experiment mentality with regard to all sorts of things, whether it's breaking out of a comfort zone and maybe moving towards a bigger change in your life, or adopting any practices, in this case, maybe writing practices. But 30 days is a chunk of time in which you can really accomplish something. It's also a chunk of time that's not too intimidating. So if something's not working, you know, I've set this vow to do it every day for 30 days. But if it isn't my thing or my cup of tea, on day 31, I am no longer going to do it. But I think we really underestimate what we can accomplish in 1 month. And if you live a month without necessarily having an intention, it can just fly by and be in your rearview mirror, and you don't really remember what happened that month. So it was also a practice that is all about being mindful and kind of honoring the time we have and not whittling it away. So one thing, and I maybe did 1 or 2 months before my husband jumped on with this program as well, but we started to do things together. I think one of the first things we did was we'd go to bed really early and set our alarm clocks for 5 or earlier than 5. And for 30 days, really dedicate the hours between 5 and 7 a.m. to our own kind of either mindfulness, meditation, or writing practices. You know, that's something that I tried to maintain, but going to bed that early all the time started to be hard. I'm still very much a morning person, and I find that time sacred. But something that did, you know, that we did do, or I did do, was every day for 30 days, I wrote a letter to a friend, tried to get back in touch with someone, or, you know, you could write a poem every day for 30 days. If your ambition is to start putting practices in your life that are good for your health, are good for your physical fitness, are good for your writing, you can you can incorporate all sorts of practices. So reading a bit of poetry before you begin to write can be something you decide I'm going to do every day for 30 days. Or, gosh, I don't even remember a time that I haven't now journaled. I'm a believer in Julie Cameron's Artist's Way, and I write my morning pages, my 3 longhand pages every morning. But that could be something you decide, I'm going to do this every day for 30 days. And on day 31, you could say that was the greatest thing that I've ever done. And there's no way I'm giving that up. But again, it's well known that it takes about 28 days to form a habit. So this 30-day practice is along those lines of forming good habits. It doesn't take that long to kind of institute a bad habit or break a good habit, but it does take a good chunk of time to try something new. At one point, I was jumping in the ocean one summer every day for 30 days. Even if it rained, I'd be running out to the beach and dive into the waves just because it felt like I'm here and I really need to do this. You could cold plunge every day for 30 days, or you could go vegan every day for 30 days. But there are all these different lifestyle trials that you could take on, and you're like, I don't think this made me feel any better, or I think this really woke me up. And it's also something like I read Steve Jobs and maybe even Gandhi, like people who treat their bodies and their lives kind of like a laboratory and do different experiments to see, like, we're all chemistry and water and organs, and like what works best for our brain, for our motivation, what works best for our digestive system, our sleep. I feel like if you get to a certain age and you kind of haven't figured out how your machine operates best, it's good to undertake a few of these experiments where you're tweaking a few variables 30 days at a time.
As we get older, we say time goes quicker. To do with the fact that a lot of the time you do the same thing day in and day out. When you're a child growing up, particularly between the ages of 5 and 7, it seems like an eternity because you're discovering new things all the time. And so, it could just be doing something totally different, take a different route to work and all the rest of it.
Sometimes I write what my goals are for the day, and writing them down actually holds myself a little accountable, and also is a bit of a mission statement for the day, so that if like that thing comes up that I wasn't expecting, if it's not that important, I'm not going to let it derail me, because I know like what I really wanted to accomplish in that day, or what I really wanted to accomplish in a week. It kind of helps you to decide like what are the core purposeful things I have in mind, and what are these things coming out of left field that's a problem I could take on, but it's not really my problem. And I think it's good to be really intentional with and protective, especially if you're a creative person. Protecting that time, and protecting your time and your brain space. Your brain is your instrument, really. Your life, your brain, and your clarity. That's your instrument. And so to protect that is important. I have a morning meditation, and I also finish with a prayer. And one of the things I pray for, besides grace every day, is clarity. I think going through a day with a feeling that I didn't just wander from room to room, it's such a gift at this age. Yeah. So having clarity is so important.
What advice would you give somebody who sort of thinks, look, I really want to write a book? Where'd you start?
For me, I don't write in my novels in the way they appear when they're finished, with the beginning, middle, and end. I write things all out of order. So first bit of advice I would give is don't worry about how this story is ultimately going to unfold, but just start getting the story down. I am inspired by visions and scenes I have in my head that my characters are taking part in. I'm a visual person. I also picture bits of dialogue that I may have overheard, but I'm imparting them on my characters, and I want to have them in conversation and conflict and relationship with other people. So instead of feeling where's this story going to start? Where's it going to go? I'll just sit at my computer and I will write a scene between two people And it might be something that's not really going to happen until the end of the story. But it's like that one thing that just keeps coming up in my head. And it's like that motivating scene, that bit of conflict or struggle. Or maybe it's a peaceful scene, but I really see my character in a certain setting having an experience, and I'll write that. And another day, I might write something completely different. But do not get overwhelmed by the idea that you have to write something that's linear. And what I use is a word or an author word processing tool called Scrivener. And it allows you to write in, the jargon is to write in these islands. And you can then have them all up on a virtual corkboard. So, and the ability to change the order in which they happen. So I really try to keep each island to one scene. And I will write for almost a year or so of these islands and figuring out what's happening to this character, what's this story, how is this unfolding? And then Scrivener gives you the option to like make an outline. So I will put the scenes in order and align them with an outline and figure out where I have missing gaps, and then start working towards filling in the gaps. Maybe at that point, I might do a printout and see if the story is interesting. And I know that it still needs work, but I might give it to someone. So I'm a big proponent by my third novel to share work with trusted readers and workshop writing partners, and getting reaction. Like, what do you find really interesting? What do you want to know more about? What direction do you see this going in, like a compelling direction? And so I like to get feedback. And that's easy to say now that I've written 3 books and I kind of have a bit of a thick skin. I know I am a decent writer, and I don't feel scared that someone's going to tell me, Jeannie, you can't even put 2 words together. So why don't you go like find something else to do all day? And so I'm really just getting some feedback, and I continue to read a lot while I'm doing the writing. I look for novels that might be of a similar genre or a similar sensibility. It doesn't necessarily need to be a story, because the story, in my view, is like a scaffolding over that's going to create a plot and have you turn the page. Like for Daughter of a Promise, it's about all this stuff that happens over a year in New York. But really, like at the core of this is a young woman trying to know herself better and answer some questions around what is love and what is feminism, and do I need to like let everything go from my past and learn anew in New York what it means to be an adult? Or I don't want to ruin the book for you, Bob, but she ends up realizing everything she needed to know came from her yaya in Miami. So that's but that's like the sensibility and the theme. And I needed to kind of figure out a plot. And so there's like an external story for my character, which is the plot and the action that happens. And then there's like this internal thing. So over the course of many revisions and many drafts, you focus on different components of the craft. But the very first thing to just get you started, if you dream about these people in a situation, just write that one scene. And then you're like, how did the man get there? How did the woman get there? Where do they go next? And then just write that scene. Or if you're inspired by the setting, write that beautiful setting. Is it a home? Is it a mountain? Is it a beach? Is it a jungle? And write whatever really like is that first thing that you think this will be easy to put this on the page. Do that. And then these things, one leads to the next. And another trick I like is to leave the day's work slightly unfinished. So I might write a scene that I know exactly how I want it to end, but I don't quite write that ending, and I save it for the next day. Because when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm writing the ending of that scene, but then I still have a few hours of excitement and energy, and then it seems easier to go on to the next scene as opposed to starting the morning with a blank assignment that I have to jump into. So Yeah, I would just say don't create any rules for yourself. And the most important thing is get that pesky voice off your shoulder that's saying, Bob, are you kidding me? You're spending 2 hours doing this when, like, who do you think you are? Who's ever going to read this? And why are you doing this? You should really be out cutting the grass, or like you should be doing your laundry or cleaning out the attic. Like, why are you doing this? So everybody's going to have that voice. And the most important thing to do is to just take it and squeeze it and shut it up and turn off the internet and not listen to any voice, because this is the greatest gift and the greatest act of self-love, is to sit down and express yourself through writing or any other art.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. You mentioned just one thing I made a mental note of. You mentioned there about unfolding quite a couple of occasions where the story and the plot are unfolding. Does that mean then that from your own point of view, you haven't necessarily got an exact ending in mind when you start the book?
Oh, absolutely. And then when you finally figure out what the ending is, it changes the beginning, because
Wow.
the ending and the beginning are very connected. So the beginning you actually rewrite. In Daughter of a Promise, you'll notice it's a letter to her unborn son, but then she quickly begins the storytelling with the spring she graduates from college and ends up in New York City. And one of the original drafts of the book was the moment she took a pregnancy test and realized she was pregnant, and she's sitting on the toilet with the EPT and waiting for either a single line or a double line. And a lot of it's very similar to a scene that's now in the middle of the book, but so many people said, why are you starting it here? Why are you starting it here? And I'm like, well, all the teachers say start with like the big moment of impact, the big moment of drama. Other reactions were, well, I don't even really know her yet, and I don't care if she's pregnant or not, and I don't even know her in this relationship, so I don't really care if the relationship has legs or not. So like I really need to get to know her better. And because I was working in Scrivener, it really wasn't that hard to obviously it was hard to revise the novel, but to do that first bit of moving all the parts, it's like really beautiful. Imagine being a writer before there was a computer and word processing. You had to retype everything, and you're like, I don't think I'm going to change this page because all the pagination will now be different. Just the ability now to like move things around and not feel wed to the way it comes out of your head at first, and like there's a more logical way. Yeah. At some point during the revision process, you need to think about your reader and making this a pleasant and easy process on them, and not confusing them, and having them just be able to read, put the book down, pick it back up, and feel like that pleasant, immersive sensation. I overcomplicated it the first time and was like jumping around to these very like high tension moments early on in the book. But that's just an example of how you can work on something for 3 years and then completely change things. I have this quote right here on my desk. I'll read it. I read it every day. Listen to the wisdom of the book while you are writing it. It knows what it wants to be.
You're there serving the story.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about creating art and writing. You have this idea for a story, but then like for it to be really rich and multiple threads going through it, I think you have to like just be really open to it taking a long time and surrendering to the process of rewriting and making it rich.
Yeah. Well, all great advice there. And on your latest book, what sort of reception have you received so far?
Oh, I was thrilled with a starred Kirkus review. Do you have Kirkus reviews in the UK? But they're quite ornery and very difficult to get positivity from. And so to get not just a positive review, but a starred review was so thrilling. I have gotten great reception from both people who know the story from the Book of Samuel and love the modern retelling, as well as people who have zero footing in the Bible and never really realized that there was a connection there. People like yourself, men who've liked it, young people who've liked it. My typical reader for my first few books were I'd say readers who were more of my demographic, and to have younger readers really enjoying this book means a lot as well. So the reviews have been great.
You mentioned earlier on about some inspiration for a new book connected with the farming. Have you started your new book of fiction yet?
Yeah. Well, I have this wonderful writing group of folks I met when I was in a fellowship year. And the writing group meets every other week, and we share work in progress. And really, my motivation to get started on my next books was very immediate because I wanted to stay in my writing group with my pals. And so I started writing about a young woman who appears in Daughter of a Promise. She's David's daughter, and her name is Tamara. And in the book of Samuel, her story is quite tragic, and I'm trying to figure out how I can do that justice. But basically, she goes on a journey because of something terrible that happens to her. She leaves home, and I've ended up taking her to a farm. And so, I really do think that the healing and the love and peace I'm finding on the farm might be the place where Tamara heals from her wounds, or at least finds solace from her wounds. And I'm following the same advice I just gave. There's a lot that needs to happen before she gets to the farm. Yes. But right now I'm motivated to write some of these farm scenes and skip the part I don't feel like writing right away.
One last question I've got, Jeanne, is what do you do outside of writing and farming?
Well, I mentioned I'm an athlete.
Yes.
I'm actually a national champion in squash.
Oh, wow.
Both in doubles and singles. So you guys in the UK know that sport quite well. And then I'm an avid skier. In the winter, I really love both Nordic skiing and alpine skiing. And I like to be at high altitude, and I'd like to push myself down runs that are slightly scary, and just maybe get in a bit over my head with adventure and skiing. It's good. Another 30-day practice so that fear and change are something I'm more conditioned to.
And if we've got any listeners who'd like to find out a bit more about you, Jeanne, where should they go?
The easiest place to find me is on my website, which is jeanneblasberg.com. And from there, I have links to my social media presence. I'm most active on Instagram at Jeanne Blasberg Author. On my website, you'll find links to all my books, as well as an opportunity to sign up for my newsletter, which I do on Substack. And I publish a newsletter about once a month that is amusing on writing and farming and life and all kinds of things about my journey.
Well, Jeanne, it's been a really fascinating conversation. It's been interesting to learn more about your books and being an author, and also about your new life in farming. Also, the advice you have given for those of us who are contemplating writing a book has been absolutely invaluable. My guest today has been Jeanne Blasberg. Jeanne is an award-winning best-selling author, an essayist, and her new book, Daughter of a Promise, is out now. You can find a link to Jeanne's website and her book in the show notes. Thank you for coming on the show, Jeanne.
Thank you, Bob. I loved it.
You have been listening to Undercurrent Stories. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to share the show link to your friends and family. And if you have 60 seconds, I will be most grateful if you would please rate and review. To hear more episodes, please subscribe to the show and visit undercurrentstories.com. If you leave your email in the link, we will notify you as soon as new episodes are released. Also, check out our social media links, details of which can be found on the show notes. Until next time, this is Bob Wells wishing you all the very best.